And that is why I truly believe that shifting how we interact and relate with each other is changing the system to whichever direction we change our relation.
Hey, this is Oren. Welcome back to Working with Feeling. I think you're going to find our guest today to be fascinating around the intersection of how our nervous system and our ability to feel what we're feeling directly shapes the way we show up in leadership, in work, collaboration, and especially when it comes to continuing to be high functioning in disruptive, chaotic times. Much of what you'll find out there around nervous system regulation tends to focus on you as an individual. How do you regulate yourself? How do you go into a back room, do your little practices, and come back fresh? And while regulating yourself individually is always an important skill to have, I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's not somatics if it's not relational. Where the rubber meets the road when it comes to our ability to regulate is when we're showing up in connection with other people. Tamás is a leadership guide who helps high-performing leaders and creators shift out of overthinking and into real-time relational presence. His work is a blend of nervous system regulation, emotional clarity, and embodied leadership. He's had a very interesting and diverse professional path, working on innovation at Morgan Stanley, building Greenpeace's climate psychology lab, leading social impact work, coaching in mental health settings, and through his upcoming group experience called Inner Mastery Lab, and his connection tool, Who Cars, Tamás supports people in leading, creating, and relating from a place of solid fluidity, anchored in themselves, responsive to others. Outside of work, you'll often find him walking across the High Line, hundreds of meters above the ground. Yes, I asked him about this. His personal practice for emotion regulation, inner stillness, and trust in motion. Enjoy. It's rare that I encounter someone centering the relational. So I think a really interesting place to start could be, well, how did you arrive at this recognition of, oh, this is a really essential human concept?
There's two sides to the answer to this question. One goes back to very early days of my life, where the moment I became conscious about myself was the moment when I was in primary school. I was always feeling a little bit of an outsider, and I vividly remember the moments when some of these inner voices were starting to come in with regards to what other people might be thinking about me. What do I think about them? And that hugely impacted how I was relating to them, which was at the time was really coming from a space of fear, maybe even shame, and really much degrading myself to not being cool enough or not being smart enough. But at the time I wasn't able to recognize that all of this is happening in me, right? So I was just sensing that, hey, something in this relational field is weird. And fast forward maybe 24 years, I received a very strange email with a password protected PDF inviting me to start to experiment with how to discover this challenging question of bringing the sustainability development goals closer to small and medium-sized businesses through an invitation of relating to each other differently. And there comes page 3, when in this invitation, the guiding call was to show up in a quite long retreat, like 6-day retreat, with the idea of not talking about what you actually do to tackle this big issue, but purely focusing on who you are. And try to start relating from this playful space where you start sharing your story of where you're coming from and what has been your life experience so far. And dropping the idea of jumping straight into like, oh, I'm an investment banker or I'm a social activist, and how do we solve this big problem? And it was freaking hard. because we were highly motivated, one would say high performing people who really wanted to see something more innovative around the social and environmental challenges we were facing. That was the second point that really opened my eyes towards this field of what some start calling, and I really enjoy this word, relational intelligence.
The first thing is, as you're describing this and receiving this password protected PDF via email and this invitation, I'm imagining almost like the film Knives Out, where everyone goes to this island and the mysteries unfold from there. But the deeper question is that I have around what you're sharing is, what's that like to come together with a group of people who are, the ambitious, high performing, highly intelligent people, having a creative constraint, for a lack of a better phraseology, where you have to approach it in a way that maybe you would never approach meeting new people in general, but especially working on solving problems.
It's triggering because it challenges a lot of the dominant narratives and norms through which I think most of those people who were involved in that group were thinking about leadership. Leadership as being something that's decision and outcome driven, that has to come with metrics and KPIs, and we need to understand the goals and where we're heading to, and then the subsequent inner qualities like command and control. So all of these, I think, were in us as inherent way of leading. And especially in me, I was born 3 years before the Berlin Wall fell off in Hungary, a post-communist country today, with a very strong patriarchal culture and a very strong male-dominant leadership style. And in my relational field, obviously, that has impacted me a lot, from just seeing how teachers were talking to students, or how my father's boss was talking to him, and so on and so forth. So those patterns were, and to an extent, they are still in me. And so when you find yourself in a room in which you cannot jump into fixing, which is another quality of the mind that we as humans really want to do, fix the problems that are coming our way, and suddenly you're willingly forced to slow down how your mind is spinning, slow down how your nervous system is getting activated, and learn to tolerate the heightened level of dopamine that's bubbling in your body. It's triggering. And so step number one is what do I do with this trigger? What does it show to me about myself? And importantly, in this space, there was time and energy created to go into those inner developmental journeys on the spot with helpers and guides and different processes that allowed us to ease into this, and that allowed us to start connecting to each other with more depth and with more intimacy.
I'm imagining that there had to have been at least 1 or 2 blowups. Is there anything that you're willing to share? Just because I'm imagining, I don't think I've ever seen this type of persona come together in a group in the way you're describing.
Yeah, the caveat of this story is that we got £500,000 to play with as part of this experiment, which is a lot of money. And somehow the leader or the person who got this big grant and who were inviting and convening this community, he managed to negotiate with the funders a condition that we don't put conditions and KPIs on this money, but we really turn this experiment an embodied experiment of being in it, truly really getting forced to start connecting and playing, and through that letting the solution unfold. This very first retreat, we were sitting there also in our own norms and narratives and triggers, and there was one participant who was representing the founder and the NGO who was managing this whole process. And she was very much in that space of like, okay, we need to get to conclusion, we need to get to outcomes, we need to get the goals. And she was really pushing that agenda. And very shortly, she was able to start pulling in a couple of people who were also feeling that uncomfortable sensation in the body and wanted to really fall back into the old patterns and start formulating almost like a little subgroup within the experience to start standing up against it. So it wasn't really a blow up because it was us learning how to be in this space. But it made us realize that we really need to put a special care into inviting people into connecting differently with each other, because we're not used to it anymore in pretty much most of the mainstream parts of society and where we are exposed to connection.
What I'm hearing as you're describing that example is there's a discomfort that I think many of us would connect to around wrestling with the question, the problem, in a way that is open and allows new things to unfold in a way that's very divergent. And I'm curious if you have a perspective on why is that something that's so uncomfortable? Does it connect back to what you're saying in terms of we're just out of practice? Are there other things involved?
I think the roots of this discomfort is staged in two levels. And the second one is obviously coming out of level one, which is more of the inner barriers. So internally, as society was shifting throughout, especially throughout the last couple of 100 years, but even beforehand, we were getting into more of this individualized, segmented type of lifestyle that we were living, and we were moving away from tribal communal living that we can still observe in indigenous communities into this what is today a highly individualized lifestyle. As this shift was going on, we were having less and less opportunity to be held in what's going on inside, meaning that we started to develop the emotion of being fearful when I need to open up or need to become vulnerable, really showing myself. Subsequently, we started to create inner stories around why is it good for us to stay in that more closed down version of myself, which then became, the voices in our head that we're trying to suss out these days. And of course, psychology causes the different mechanisms. And so I really truly believe that these inner responses to the outer input that we experience in our childhood, like parents not holding us well enough in our emotions, in our experiences, there's a lot of talk about that topic these days. But that resulted in these defense mechanisms, which then results in how do I go out to the road and how much am I willing to or am I open to show in different communities, especially in the workplace. Another inner barrier I believe that's very strong is this transactional thinking that I need to really be getting somewhere with my outcomes and my goals, and I cannot bring in my inner world and my whole self that would actually maybe slow down that process to get from A to B. And I also truly believe that the nervous system part is playing a lot in this as well. So underneath all of this, there is the undiscovered territory of how am I really doing at this given moment? Am I overactivated and putting out everything, maybe even too much? Or am I maybe being in the more shut down, low energy level, more depressed state, which is closing me down? And is this actually impacting how I connect to other people? And then the level two is what got normalized out of all of these individual traits into the organizational world, or more specifically into the business world, in terms of short-termism, in terms of not seeing an immediate return on investment when we start relating to each other, and in terms of the lack of true psychological safety and trust that would allow us to start opening up in those settings.
Yeah. Sort of a systems expression of a dysregulated nervous system or being in a survival state that becomes ingrained through policy and how we work together and procedure.
Exactly. And I think, maybe this is a good moment to actually introduce one theory behind this, which is coming from a German philosopher that I really like to refer to, Niklas Luhmann, who says that the social systems are actually self-producing systems of the interactions that are happening within that system. So how we relate to each other boil into the organizational world, but we also boil into different segments of society, and then maybe going out to a larger national level, and then also to the globalized level. And that is why I really truly believe that relating or shifting how we interact and relate with each other is inherently changing the system to whichever direction we change our relation, because it's not just that we are changing to open and more trustworthy and more vulnerable relationship these days, but also what we can see on a global pattern is that we are changing to more rigid and more closed and more controlled systems.
Yeah.
That also impacts how we are.
I really want to go deeper into what we're talking about in very tangible terms as we're talking about how we relate to ourselves, to one another, to our systems, and how all of those things are in relationship all the time. So it has taken me a while to get to the point where this is now a very tangible thing. And I also remember at one point when this would have been something that to me was just way too fluffy. And so I want to make sure that we're making it really as clear as possible, because it is actually something, it's material we can work with. And I think it's important to first draw a distinction where there is a lot out there that I find is very smart people talking about ideas very much from head to head, very much not relating to one another as they're engaging in that conversation. And from an outsider, it's interesting. It can be intellectually stimulating. It's kind of a gas that you can't really catch because it's not embodied, it's not relational. And I wonder if we can maybe start with that in terms of describing how the relational actually is playing a role in our everyday. If we can maybe start with how is that different, just for a basis of comparison, from the elites in the ivory tower having these conversations that are not quite grounded.
Okay. So let me bring in a very practical example. But before I do that, let me just add one thing to your question, which is that I really firmly believe that it is the balance between the rational and the relational or emotional or intuitive that we need to find to be able to operate on what someone recently called on our primal intelligence, meaning that we are able to tap into both the mind but also to the body's intelligence. And so the conversations that you are talking about in those towers are often happening more from the rational mind. There's no problem with it. Like, it brought us to where we are today. Like, I'm sitting in this beautiful house and I have heating and it's the autumn. I'm currently in New Zealand, and this was all built through the rational mind. But the example through which I want to show the importance of this relational aspect is the example of helping to build the cognitive science lab of Greenpeace. It's a unit called MindWorks, which has now spinned out from the larger organization. And I used to work for them for 3 years at the very early stages. And we're at 2020, just before the COVID crisis, researching really heavy emotional and psychological state of the environmental degradation and innovating on how the climate campaigning should change, considering these psychological insights. By this time, we've been building a team purely on the idea of human connection and purely on the idea of how can we better relate to each other so that we can have more trust within the team, so that we can come up with better innovative ideas in tackling this large issue. And this practically meant that every Monday when we had our team check-in, we did take the effort to ask real questions, deep questions, and get to know each other and get to know how we all relating to this very heavy topic that were creating a lot of anxiety within the team. And the moment when we got to the COVID crisis, and this is what I want to really pinpoint, was a moment when a lot of team experienced getting stuck in their whatever they were building, because the entire environment in which they were building into has changed from day one to day two. What the research since then also has shown is that those teams who were in a psychological safe and trusted environment were the teams who were able to very quickly iterate and make something good or something innovative out of the situation. And I'm not talking about teams who were super well funded and they could put the shitload of money into iterating while their employees were burning out, but I'm also talking about teams who were maybe less well funded on the money side, but more well funded on the psychological safety and well-being side. And what I've experienced in that moment is that within 4 weeks, we were able to shift all the 3 major projects that we were running with an easy move, because we just simply stayed a lot more resilient in that moment. Connecting those moments to the difficult experiences that we were facing, because we were practicing it already for 1.5 years, and we were able to name whatever was going on, suddenly more space was created in our creative mind so that we were not limited just by those quick and instant ideas that are often coming out from a fear, a fight, or flight, or whatever nervous system state response we are in at the moment, that would not be as whole or as clever or as innovative. And I think that's the key in answering your question, that when the relational field is well worked, then your awareness becomes more peripheral and more open and more wide, as opposed to just seeing those 1 or 2 options in a tunnel vision that we usually tend to see, and also what often I think AI only tend to see, because I think AI is trained often in that tunnel vision.
What I'm really appreciating is the articulation of resilience as a collective experience or a group level experience and quality, rather than how it's typically discussed as individual resilience. You have to build your resilience, which is very much contrary to what it means to be a human being, having evolved to be deeply socially connected and to actually select for your ability to tap into social structures and become stronger as a result of that connection, as opposed to being a lone wolf doing things on your own. I think it's something that more and more leaders are recognizing is a key to resilience. The reason psychological safety as a concept, I believe, has taken off the way it has is because it touches upon something that many of us have felt for a long time, which is we can't continue to be creative and innovate and come up with new ideas for these pressing issues if everybody's in a stance of protection, self-preservation. And that's really what we're addressing with this movement of psychological safety, is working toward what you're describing, which is where there's resilience by virtue of there being connective tissue, a strong relational field within the team.
Yeah, the word co-regulation comes to me, and the word role modeling comes to me. So I think a lot of the leadership development processes in the past has been missing out on really iterating that you as a role model, you will highly influence your system, the way you show up. And then they were also missing the step of teaching these leaders how do they integrate this new version, these new ways of being into their teams, into their systems, even into their relationships at home. So many of the people I work with are usually people who have done some work already on themselves, mostly through talk therapy. And I know that you and I are on the same page when it comes to that topic, which is great because we do need to create an insight and an analysis of what has happened to me and understand the different correlation in my own internal system. But then they struggle with really changing things real time when they get triggered, again, either at home or at the workplace, and then bringing that back into their ways of being, and also then exposing the team to start practicing new ways of relating to each other.
Yeah. I'd like to explore this idea of being a role model as you recognize how co-regulation works and the impact of being in a position of authority or power as it relates to your ability to influence the field and influence your team. Because this is, to me, the funny thing about traditional leadership development is there's so many amazing skills that we're building, and then it's as though all of those skills fall into quicksand because there's no attention to the state underneath. And that state is going to influence your ability to learn and actually implement what you're learning, how your team is going to relate to you as you're attempting to implement these new skills. So it's something that I hope several years from now in the leadership development space, there will be kind of this collective looking back and laughing at this time where it was like, we were ignoring everything that is most essentially human as we were working on developing this crucial skill set. And so I'd love to hear more of what you think about this and maybe where you see it going, because I know that you have a program, Inner Mastery Lab. And so I'd love to hear your perspective around this.
There are a few things coming up, so I'm going to try to organize them in a consumable way. But the first thing that comes to my mind when you said, like, you hope that in a few years we're going to be laughing on this, I hope the same. And I also just really want to recognize that we wouldn't be here today having this discussion if all this great work has not been done beforehand. So I really try to shift my perspective, and it's really difficult to see these past moves as a way of, oh, this is how we are evolving. And I was born into this moment, and I'm lucky enough to be working on this.
Me too.
So I think it was roughly 10 years ago when I really started to dig deeper into what's going on inside of me and how do I start figuring out all these things that are happening in my mind and in my body. And I think like 3 or 4 years into this journey, or maybe even more, I had to recognize that my relationship to my sister is messed up. And in fact, maybe she and my parents were the last few people whom I couldn't relate the way I could open up or be vulnerable with some of my friends. I was asking myself, like, why is this? And especially, why is this when my sister is also doing her own work? How come that there are these two quite self-aware humans walking a beautiful path, and then they themselves are not able to relate with each other? So I took the hard move of initiating to my sister to attend a nonviolent communication training, which was also spiced up with somatics and nervous system regulation tools, so that we can actually really practice together how it would feel and how it is to start relating to each other differently. Man, that was super difficult at the beginning, because we needed to start talking about our own perception of a given situation, like what is going on in me right now, and really show myself, really own my emotion in that field, and then be able to express a need that I was really struggling with before. And the whole thing felt super fabricated. And our teacher kept saying that it does feel fabricated at the beginning when you get into this. I wouldn't even call this role playing, because we were not playing. We were, bringing in real topics between ourselves and trying to learn on the go how to do this differently. This is an important piece on how I work with people these days, and what I see as an important next move for this industry, which is that when we cover the basics through regulation, we create the fertile ground so that we can shift into a state that will allow us to connect a bit more deeper what's going on inside of me. And then going inside and untangling the stories and learning and mastering how to really connect to the feeling. And through that, starting to experience a lot more space that Viktor Frankl talks between the stimulus and response. So that, and then a third step to really go into learning on the go and practicing with my people, with my team, with my family, the hard stuff, putting in the reps and going back to it and really looking at it as almost like a relational gym that I need to go to, and I need to keep putting myself out to situations where I can start responding differently. Because if you don't do that, none of the inner work is relevant. The system or the social system will only change if we change the quality of interactions. And the inner work is an important condition to that. But this is just one part of the story. If you don't build on it, and if you don't do the hard work to take it out, then it's just a little bit of self-pampering. It's just a little bit of feeling good about ourselves. And maybe even just feeding some of our egoistic patterns that are holding us back from really truly changing in the situations that matter.
This, what you're describing to me, is the difference between more mainstream approaches to personal growth and approaches integrating the relational. And here I'll take a cue from you, because I have to remind myself to do this as well. Let's honor where the steps that we're physically stepping upon in order to be able to do this work. And there, of course, is a place in doing that deeper individual exploration, excavation, and that is essential in order to be able to then bring it into the relational. But that is a step that we really can't skip if we want to make broader impact and change, and to sustain the change. Because the broader changes that are happening because of, to the point that you were bringing up, how we're shifting the way we're interacting with one another and relating with one another. That ties back to what's happening within each of us as individuals. But where the rubber meets the road is in relationship. And that is what, and just going back to that example of you and your sister, that's where you've got to be willing to get messy and really uncomfortable, not just in a back room somewhere, but with another person, maybe with other people around. And that's the type of experience that I hope more and more leaders will be opting into, as uncomfortable as it can be, as artificial as it can sometimes feel in the beginning, and getting in those reps because the transformation for everyone involved can be so profound. And for you, your quality of life, and everyone you touch, everyone you lead, everyone who's just you cross paths with.
So much so. And when I hear you speaking, this question comes to me, that what's the price you pay if you don't do this? Because on the one hand, if you do it, it is a little bit uncomfortable at the beginning, but if you're held with the right support, very fast you'll see that, oh, it's so much easier, it's so much more fluid, it's so much more human. Whereas if you stay in that, then these mental loops and then the subsequent behavioral patterns, they just keep repeating themselves. And then your energy get depleted, your motivation get depleted, and suddenly you find yourself in a mental health center with a burnout.
Yeah. This is one of the biggest learnings for me personally in my own journey, for that of my clients, is often, wow, I was holding a lot. I was carrying a lot of tension. No wonder I felt so depleted. I was rigid. I might have still been able to do all these things in the world and accomplish all these things, but the cost of carrying all of that weight of trying to keep everything together, as opposed to just developing a practice of being present in what's here right now in these interactions, that is so tangible after we have that initial hump of discomfort, and then we feel a level of connection on the other side where it's like, wow, like, what was I, if only I knew this sooner, is the common refrain. I'm sure you've heard that many times before.
For sure, yeah. Many times I co-create this card game that's all about giving people a crutch to help get into these more authentic connections. And often some people would be very resistant playing this game, answering a question about themselves. And what I found after playing this game on all continents with thousands of people across many cultures, that those people who are the most resistant at the beginning are the one who wants to play a second round. And that shows so much to me, that when you are invited in and held in the right space to start doing something that's so innate to the humans, but we got so alienated from it, then they suddenly realize that, oh my God, it's amazing to be heard. And it's also amazing to listen and hear other people's stories. And that so much more are in common in us, as opposed to what, politics or different forces are trying to implant in us as differences of, polarizing factors. And that is very profound to me. So that initial resistance is a big question of mine, that how can we create the space on small scale for leaders, but also on large scale in societies, to overcome that resistance, and so that we start really tapping into that magic that we have between us as humans.
I think one of the gifts of this type of work that is inclusive of the whole body's intelligence and our relational intelligence is that we recognize we approach the resistance lightly. The resistance is welcome, and when you can approach it that way and be held in a group that way, suddenly has far less power over you.
Yeah. Also, I think because you start realizing that it's not unique, many people think that, oh, it's only me. And it's, for me, it's always fascinating to realize that we do think that. The ego is so strong to make us believe that I am unique in this. But essentially,
this is my problem. This is like a bigger problem than that other person has. So yeah, I'm a special case.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Tamás, I'd be what's the word? I'd be remiss if I were not to ask you about your, I won't call it a hobby because it's more than that, but your practice. Because I love to ask people about what's one practice that you have in your life that supports you with deepening your presence. And I don't know if there's anything I can think of that requires maybe quite as much presence as your practice. So I'd love to hear you share a little bit about it.
Sure. Thanks for that. Yeah, so what you're referring to is my crazy activity of what's called highlining, which is pretty much walking on tight ropes, slack lines up in the mountains, often really high. Like the highest I've been to was 850-meter high. It's the deepest gorge of Europe in the north of Greece. And it was a 1 kilometer long high line. And, you know, when I first stood on the high line 5 years ago, I was completely frozen. I was actually sitting because I couldn't stand up for a whole year. And then I couldn't walk for another whole year. So it really took me 2 years to unlock my frozen body and to learn how to regulate myself, how to feel my fear, and how to start stepping into that space where I can trust myself to be able to balance on this tightrope, which I could easily do above the ground. So I knew I could do it, but all of these activations were really holding me back. And so what I realized myself that this is an opportunity for me to actually piece together all those little practices that I do in my everyday reality. So there's nothing special in the little practices. They are what I do down here on the ground. But up there, I can piece them together and get a holistic idea of where am I with my own well-being at the moment. Because if I'm not able to feel my fear, or if I buy into the limiting thoughts that are coming, then I'm either falling down of the line or I'm just running away. But when I'm in that state of flow and I'm able to walk and cross a line, then I know that I'm now training my ability to actually tick all the boxes and really walking. And it's a good training ground because there you get a visible sign. If you're not ticking one of the boxes, you fall down. I'm not present. And most of society would probably be lying on the ground in the city. So then what I could do is to bring back all those experiences down here and say like, okay, can I walk on the street or during a hike, or can I be relating to someone with that quality that I'm actually embodying and practicing up there? So that is my practice. I invite you to just look up slacklining in your area because there are these crazy people everywhere. And this is a very open and inviting community. And it's a really great practice to put all those different tools together.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. Anytime you see people slacklining in the park, if you go up and want to give it a shot, you'll be welcomed. And you can start one meter off the ground or less. You don't have to go, you don't have to start very high at all. Heights have always been a fear of mine. I jumped out of a plane for that reason. And for me, that was even not as challenging as standing on a roof. So it's something that has been present for me for a long time. But my question to you is that phase or that shift from either not like just before getting on to the slack line or even going from sitting to then standing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe, because I think we've been talking a little bit today of around that getting over the hump as it relates to the discomfort. I wonder what that was like in that setting to go from point A to point B, never mind to the points where you're walking a kilometer suspended so high in the air.
Really good question. I want to say that there is not like a shift that happens just that easy. This is a process. So the more I was going back to it, the easier it got. And of course, before I go on the line, I do my breathing exercises and I visualize. But that phase at the beginning took me, to try to stand up for the first go, it took me maybe 10, 15 minutes. Now it takes me 10, 15 seconds. And I still feel the fear. I do my breathing, so I regulate my nervous system. That shortens the space. I do my little tricks, and that shortens the space. And suddenly, that 15-minute period becomes only 10, 15 seconds. And it's the same with the resistance on how we want to relate to each other. At the beginning, it will be painful. At the beginning, you will not want to do it. And at the beginning, you will want to use the cards as a tool to help you. But at some point, you will just meet a new person, and suddenly you will feel confident enough to start a conversation with a question like, what makes you smile these days? And suddenly you'll get an instant feedback because they will be like, wow, no one ever asked me that question. This is amazing.
I love so much about that answer. One of the points that you made that I want to emphasize is you were describing how when you're looking to show up differently, more present with more of yourself, there's a before, during, and after.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about what am I doing while I'm doing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be such an opening compared to how we typically relate to something new that we're doing.
Yeah, really good point.
Can you say, because you spoke to the before and during, I imagine there's also an after for you in order to integrate the experience. That's an assumption. What would you say?
On the high line or in the relational field?
Specifically around the high line, but it could be either.
So here's the two things. So after I'm able to stand up and walk, I strive to get into a state of flow, which is the after of that moment, which is a practice on how to really trust my body to just do it and not let the mind to try to control what my body can know that needs to do. And then after that whole experience of coming down to the ground, so the after experience, what I'm really doing is that I ground. I ground because being up high can let you live in that pink, too creative, too intuitive road and not really connect with what's the material, what's here, and how do I find the balance down here. I straight away get off the line and I take a couple of minutes just to be silent on my own, connecting to the ground that's underneath me on the mountain, and really visualizing and allowing myself to just feel how am I in that moment when I'm both grounded but also just had a very high experience. And that contributes to that balance, that homeostasis that I think our body knows how to find, but we forgot it, and we should be finding our way back to it.
Beautiful. I'm hoping that as people are listening, there's a connection to a way we're trying to develop, something that we're trying to show up differently to, and how we can think about before, during, and after. How are we supporting ourselves in making that shift? Because that's a nervous system informed approach where you're recognizing I'm not a machine where I just flip a switch and I get into flow state. I have to actually support myself in arriving there and develop the practices before even that day comes so that I can draw upon them when that moment comes. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
And maybe just one point to it for the listeners who are not highlining that, there are many other balance practices that we do every day, from walking to cycling to doing stretching or anything really. So bringing this kind of perspective and this kind of awareness into what you are already doing is always, I believe, the best way to put it into your practice.
So, Tamás, where can people learn more about you and the work you do and connect with you?
My work that I do with individuals can be reached through innermasterylab.co, and the Who cards can be found on whocards.cc. I'm sure you can put these in the notes, and connect me through there and check out what I'm up to. And I'm always open to have a virtual tea and pick a Who card and connect with each other, human to human.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I hope this was helpful for you. Please leave a review. Share this with a friend. Let's bring more people into the conversation around working with feeling at the root of all the growth, all the evolution we're going for. It starts with feeling.